The rain had been falling since afternoon, turning the streets into rivers of water. The sky looked heavy and gray, as if it carried the weight of the whole world. Most people had already run home, hiding inside their warm houses while the wind howled outside. Streetlights flickered in the storm, throwing broken patterns of light on the wet ground. A nurse was driving home after her long shift at the hospital. She was tired, her eyes heavy, and her hands tight on the steering wheel as the rain kept hitting the windshield. She wanted nothing more than a hot cup of tea and some quiet rest. The day had been long and busy, and she had already helped more patients than she could count. But as she drove past the bus station, something caught her eye. There, near the corner of the empty street, stood a small figure, soaked from head to toe. At first, she thought maybe it was someone waiting for a bus, but then she realized the buses had stopped running hours ago because of the storm. The figure was tiny, too small to be an adult. She slowed down the car and looked more closely through the rain. It was a little boy. He was standing all alone, hugging himself tightly as the rain poured down on him. His clothes were wet, his hair was dripping, and his small backpack clung to his back like it was the only thing he owned. The nurse's heart sank. She pulled over and stepped out, holding her umbrella against the strong wind. "Hey," she said softly, not wanting to scare him. "Are you okay?" The boy looked up with wide, frightened eyes. He didn't speak at first. His lips were trembling from the cold, and water ran down his face like tears. "Where's your mom or dad?" she asked gently, kneeling so she could be at his eye level. My dad," the boy stammered. "I lost him." The nurse felt her heart twist. The boy looked no older than 7 or 8. He was clearly terrified, alone, and freezing in the cold rain. She couldn't imagine what he must have felt, standing there by himself with no one around. "Okay, listen," she said softly, trying to calm him. "You're safe now. I'll help you find your dad. Come with me, all right?" The boy nodded slowly, still clutching his backpack like it was his only friend. The nurse guided him toward her car and opened the door. The warm air from inside wrapped around them like a blanket. She took off her own jacket and placed it around his shoulders before helping him inside. "Thank you," he whispered in a small voice. She smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry. We'll find your dad." As she got back behind the wheel, she asked him where he last saw his father. "At the bus station," he said quietly. "We were trying to catch a bus, but then there were so many people. And the rain." "I lost him," the nurse nodded, trying to piece things together. Maybe the father was still searching nearby, or maybe he had gone to get help. Either way, she knew they had to start looking quickly. But first, the boy needed warmth. She drove to a small cafe that stayed open late. They went inside, dripping water everywhere. The waiter looked surprised but quickly brought them 2 cups of hot cocoa. Boy wrapped his small hands around the warm cup and took tiny sips. His shoulders shook less now, and some color returned to his cheeks. The nurse sat across from him, watching with concern. "Do you know your dad's phone number?" she asked. The boy shook his head. "I just know his name. And we were moving here. Today was our first day." The nurse's heart ached. A new town. No friends. No family. And now separated from his father on a stormy night. She couldn't leave him alone. She tried calling the local police, but the storm had caused so many accidents that the lines were busy. They would have to keep trying. For now, she decided the bus station was their best chance. Maybe the father was still there, searching frantically in the rain. When they arrived, the place was almost empty. Only a few workers and travelers remained, huddled under the roof. No one recognized the boy or his father. The boy's face fell. His small hands clutched the backpack straps tighter. The nurse bent down and said softly, "Hey, we're not giving up. We'll find him. I promise." The boy nodded, but his eyes looked tired. The day had drained him, and the cold rain had made it worse. She helped him back into the car, wrapping him in a blanket she kept in the trunk. As the engine hummed and the rain kept falling, the boy slowly leaned against the seat and closed his eyes. The nurse looked at him in the rearview mirror. He was asleep within minutes, still holding onto his backpack as though it was the only thing keeping him safe. The storm raged on outside, but inside the car, there was a small bubble of warmth and safety. The nurse knew she couldn't rest until the boy was back in his father's arms. The rain slowed a little by the time the car left the bus station, but the streets were still wet and empty. The nurse kept her eyes on the road while checking the mirror now and then. The boy was still asleep in the back seat, his small face soft but tired, his hands holding that backpack like it was the most important thing in the world. She thought about what he must have felt lost in a new town. Rain pouring down, strangers everywhere, his father nowhere to be found. No child should have to feel that kind of fear. The nurse drove to the nearest cafe again. The storm had scared many people indoors, but the lights here were still warm and welcoming. She parked the car and gently touched the boy's shoulder. "Hey," she said softly. "Wake up, little one. Let's get you something warm." The boy's eyes fluttered open. He looked confused for a moment, like he forgot where he was. Then he sat up slowly. She gave him a small smile. "We'll get you some cocoa again, and then we'll keep looking for your dad. Sound good?" The boy nodded, his voice quiet. "Okay." Inside the cafe, the air smelled of coffee and baked bread. The owner, a kind old man, looked at them curiously but didn't ask too many questions. He brought the boy a steaming cup of cocoa and a sandwich without even waiting for payment. The boy ate slowly, still looking around like he expected his father to walk through the door any second. "Do you remember anything else about your dad?" the nurse asked, keeping her tone gentle. "What he was wearing? Where he might go?" The boy thought for a moment. "He had a brown jacket, and he said we were going to stay in a small hotel near the bus station. But I don't know the name," the nurse nodded. That was at least something. If the police lines weren't so busy, maybe they could call the hotels in the area. But for now, they had to keep trying themselves. She pulled out her phone again, dialing the police station one more time. Still busy. Too many emergencies tonight because of the storm. She sighed, but didn't let the boy see her frustration. He needed hope, not worry. "Here's what we'll do," she said with a smile. "We'll go to the hotels near the bus station. Maybe your dad went there looking for you." The boy's eyes lit up a little. "You think so?" "It's worth a try," she said. "We're not giving up." They finished their food quickly, and the nurse paid the cafe owner, who waved them off kindly. The rain had turned into a soft drizzle now, making the streets shine under the street lights at the first hotel. The answer was no one with that description had checked in tonight. At the second, it was the same story. The boy's shoulders drooped lower each time, but the nurse kept patting his back, telling him not to lose hope. By the third hotel, it was clear the father wasn't in any of them. The nurse took a deep breath, thinking hard. If he wasn't at the bus station and not at any of the nearby hotels, where could he be? She asked the boy, did he have a phone? The boy shook his head. "It broke last week," he said softly. That's why we can't call him." The nurse's heart ached for him. A broken phone, a new town, a storm, and now this separation. The boy leaned against her arm for comfort, and she let him. They sat back in the car, the clock on the dashboard showing it was getting late. The boy's eyes were heavy again. He tried to stay awake, but exhaustion was winning. "You can sleep if you want," the nurse said softly. "I'll keep looking," but the boy shook his head. "I want to find Dad." The nurse admired his courage, even in this scary situation. She knew she couldn't give up either. Finally, she decided to drive back to the bus station one last time. Maybe there was a clue they had missed earlier, a worker who saw something. A bag left behind, anything. When they got there, the place was nearly empty now. Only a janitor mopping the wet floors remained. The nurse described the father again, the brown jacket, the worried look, the storm. The janitor thought for a moment, then said, "I did see someone like that. He slipped on the wet floor near the entrance earlier tonight. Looked hurt." An ambulance took him to the hospital. The nurse felt her heart skip. "Which hospital?" she asked quickly. "The big one downtown," the janitor said. "Happened maybe 2 hours ago." The nurse thanked him, rushing back to the car. She looked at the boy, who had heard every word. His eyes were wide. "Is my dad okay?" he whispered. "We're going to find out," the nurse said firmly. Starting the car, the road to the hospital stretched ahead, dark but full of hope now. For the first time all night, the nurse felt they were getting closer to the answer. The road to the hospital seemed longer than ever. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the night was still cold and dark. Streetlights passed by in a blur as the nurse drove as quickly as she could, without scaring the boy sitting beside her. The boy stared out the window, his small hands gripping the straps of his backpack. His eyes looked tired, but they also held something new hope. For hours he had been afraid his father might be gone forever. Now there was finally a chance they could find him. The nurse kept glancing at him and then back at the road. "We're almost there," she said softly. "Your dad might be waiting for you right now." The boy nodded, but his lips trembled as though he was scared to believe it. They reached the hospital's emergency entrance. The bright lights outside made the place look alive even at this late hour. Doctors and nurses moved quickly in and out of the building. The smell of rain mixed with the faint smell of medicine as the automatic doors slid open for them. Inside, the waiting area was warm but crowded. People sat hunched in chairs, some holding ice packs or bandages, others with worried faces waiting for news. The nurse walked straight to the reception desk. The boy closed beside her. "Excuse me," she said politely. "We're looking for a man who was brought here a few hours ago. He slipped at the bus station. Brown jacket, medium height, around 40 years old." The receptionist checked her list, then nodded. "Yes, he's here. He had a small head injury, but nothing serious. He's stable and awake." The boy's eyes lit up and he gripped the nurse's arm. "Can we see him?" The receptionist smiled. "Of course. He's in room number 12, down the hall on the right." The boy didn't even wait for the nurse to lead the way. He ran ahead, his small shoes squeaking on the clean floor. The nurse followed quickly, her heart beating fast. When they reached the room, the door was half open. Inside, a man lay on the hospital bed with a bandage around his forehead. He looked pale but awake, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Dad!" the boy shouted, running into the room. The man turned his head, and the moment he saw his son, his eyes filled with tears. "Son!" he said, his voice breaking. He opened his arms, and the boy ran straight into them. For a long moment, they just held each other. The father kissed the top of his son's head over and over, whispering, "I was so scared. I was so scared." The boy clung to him, crying softly but smiling at the same time. The nurse stood near the door, watching silently. Her chest felt warm as she saw them together. All the worry, the long search, the storm, they had finally found each other. The father looked up at the nurse then, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for taking care of my boy. I don't know what I would have done if—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The nurse smiled gently. "He was very brave," she said. "He never gave up on finding you." The father's eyes softened as he looked at his son again. "You were so strong," he whispered, holding him even tighter. The doctor came in a few minutes later, checking the father's bandage. "You're lucky," the doctor said. "It was just a minor injury. A few days of rest and you'll be fine." The father nodded, relief washing over his face. He kept his son close, as if he was afraid the boy might disappear if he let go. The nurse quietly stepped back, giving them space. She didn't want to interrupt this moment. The boy was talking fast now, telling his father everything that had happened: the storm, the cafe, the search through the hotels, the trip back to the bus station. His small hands moved as he spoke, his eyes shining now instead of looking afraid. The father listened to every word like it was the most important story he had ever heard. He kept glancing at the nurse as though he couldn't believe a stranger had done so much for them. Finally, he said softly, "We came to this town to start a new life. I never thought our first day would be like this." He looked at the nurse again. "But because of you, it didn't end in tragedy." The nurse shook her head with a small smile. Anyone would have done the same, but in her heart, she knew that wasn't true. Many people might have driven past that bus station without stopping. She was glad she hadn't been one of them. As the father rested, the boy sat beside him, refusing to leave his side. The storm outside had finally stopped, the world turning quiet again. The nurse stood by the window for a moment, watching the rainwater drip from the hospital roof. The night had been long, but seeing the father and son together made it worth every second. The next morning, sunlight finally broke through the clouds. After a night of rain and wind, the town looked fresh and clean, the roads shining under the warm golden light. At the hospital, the father was sitting up in bed, looking much better than he had the night before. The boy was still by his side, refusing to leave him even for a minute. He held his father's hand tightly, as if he was scared that if he let go, something might take him away again. The nurse came in quietly, carrying a tray with breakfast. She smiled when she saw them together. "How are you feeling today?" she asked the father. "Better," he said softly. His voice still carried a little weakness, but his face looked calmer now. "Thanks to you." The boy looked at the nurse too, his small eyes full of gratitude. "She helped me find you," he told his father again, as if he wanted to remind him how important it was. The father reached out his hand to the nurse. "I don't have words," he said slowly. "You didn't even know us, but you helped like we were your own family." The nurse shook her head with a gentle smile. "He was alone in the rain. I couldn't just leave him there. Any mother, any father would want someone to help their child in that moment." The father nodded, his eyes moist again. He looked at his son and then back at the nurse. "You saved us both," he said. "Last night, lying here in this bed, all I could think about was him. Alone out there. And then he ran in, and it was like my whole world came back." The boy hugged his father's arm tighter. "I was so scared, Dad," he whispered. The father kissed the top of his head. "I was scared too. But she kept you safe. I'll never forget that." For a moment, there was silence in the room, the kind that speaks louder than words. Later that day, the doctor came in to check the father again. "You're lucky," the doctor said. "It could have been worse, but you should be able to leave tomorrow if everything stays normal." The father thanked him, but his eyes kept going back to the nurse. It was clear he wanted to say more, something deeper than just thank you. But the words didn't seem enough. As the day passed, the nurse stayed to help them with small things, getting food, filling forms, calling the hotel where they were supposed to stay. She didn't have to, but she didn't leave. Something about this little family had touched her heart in a way she didn't expect. In the evening, the boy sat by the window, watching the sun set outside. "Dad," he said softly, "do you think we would have found each other without her?" The father looked at the nurse, and then at his son. "I don't think so," he admitted. "The storm, the confusion. I don't even want to imagine what could have happened." The boy turned to the nurse then. "Thank you," he said simply, "for finding my dad." The nurse smiled warmly. "I only did what was right," she said softly, but in her heart, she felt something shift. She had helped many people in her life, patients at the hospital, strangers in need, but this felt different. Maybe it was because the boy was so young, or because the father's eyes carried so much relief and gratitude. Or maybe because it reminded her of how sometimes life brings strangers together for a reason. Before leaving for the night, the nurse stopped by the room one last time. The father was sitting up, the boy asleep beside him on the chair, his head resting against his father's arm. The father looked at her quietly. "When I get out of here," he said, "I want to thank you properly. A real thank you. Last night, you gave me back my son. That's not something I can repay easily." The nurse shook her head with a small smile. "You don't have to repay me," she said. "Just take care of him. That's enough." But the father shook his head. "No," he said softly. "People like you. The world needs to know about them." The nurse didn't answer right away. She only smiled again and wished him good night before walking out into the quiet hospital hallways. Outside, the streets were still wet, but the storm was gone. The air smelled fresh, the sky clearing above the rooftops. As she walked to her car, she felt lighter than she had in a long time. She had gone home many nights after helping patients, but this time felt different. This wasn't just about medicine or duty. It was about kindness. About being human. And though she didn't know it yet, this simple act of kindness was about to change her life in ways she never imagined. 2 days later, the sun shone bright across the little town. The storm had washed the streets clean, leaving behind clear skies and cool air. Life moved back to normal, but for the nurse, something about the last few days stayed in her heart. She couldn't forget the boy's wide eyes in the rain, or the way the father had held him so tightly in that hospital room. She was back at the hospital, starting her shift like any other day, when she heard a soft knock at the door of the staff lounge. "Come in," she said. Looking up from her notes, the door opened, and there they were, the father and his son, both looking brighter, healthier, and free of the fear that had hung over them before. The boy was carrying a small paper bag, and the father held a simple bouquet of fresh flowers, their colors bright and cheerful. The nurse stood up, surprised. "You're out already?" she asked, smiling. The father nodded. "The doctor said I'm good to go. But before we leave town, we couldn't leave without seeing you." The boy came forward first, holding out the paper bag with small, shy hands. "This is for you," he said softly. Inside was a handmade card. The writing was uneven, the colors a little messy, but the words were clear. "Thank you for finding my dad." There was even a little drawing of the three of them under a bright sun. The stormy clouds pushed far away in the corner. The nurse smiled, feeling a lump in her throat. "This is beautiful," she said, kneeling so she was eye level with the boy. "Did you make it yourself?" The boy nodded proudly. "I wanted you to have it, because you didn't have to help me. But you did." The father handed her the flowers next. "They're simple," he said, "but they carry our thanks. I'll never forget that night. We came here to start fresh. I thought we were alone in this town. But because of you, we know there's kindness here too." The nurse placed the flowers in a vase nearby. The bright petals seemed to light up the whole room. "I didn't do it for thanks," she said softly. "I just couldn't leave him there in the rain." The father nodded slowly. "I know. And that's what makes it so special." They talked for a while, sharing what had happened after she left the hospital that night. The father explained how they had found a small apartment nearby, how he was starting work next week, and how the boy had already made friends at the park near their building. The boy kept looking at the nurse like she was some kind of hero, though she kept telling him she wasn't. Before leaving, the father grew quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sometimes life takes away, but sometimes it gives back more than you expect." That night, I thought I was going to lose my son forever. Instead, I met someone who reminded me that the world still has good people. "We'll never forget you." The nurse felt her eyes sting a little. She wasn't someone who cried easily, but something about his words reached deep inside her. As they left, the boy ran back one last time and hugged her tightly around the waist. "Goodbye," he said. "I hope we see you again." She hugged him back gently. "You will," she said with a smile. And they did. Over the next few weeks, the father and son visited her at the hospital sometimes, bringing small things like homemade cookies or just stopping by to say hello. What started as a single night of fear and kindness slowly grew into a friendship. Nurse found herself invited to the boy's birthday party, then to a weekend picnic at the park. She laughed more in those weeks than she had in months before. The father often said, "If it wasn't for you, none of this would be here. We'd still be lost in more ways than one." One evening, as the sun set over the park where the boy played, the nurse sat with the father on a bench. He looked at her and said, "You know, when we came to this town, I thought we had no one. But now, it feels like we have family here." The nurse smiled softly, watching the boy run across the grass, his laughter filling the air. She realized then how much one night had changed everything, not just for them, but for her too. She had gone from being a stranger helping in a storm to becoming part of a story that would last a lifetime. Sometimes, life doesn't warn you when it's about to change. It just does. And for a nurse, a father, and his little boy, that rainy night had been the beginning of something neither of them had expected, but all of them would cherish forever.